So, did Mr. West do it well? The answer is yes. X, as the letter implies, is pretty sexy, it is pretty gory, and fairly effective. I will say some perhaps controversial things at the end, but yes, I do highly recommend X. So, what is the X? Well, as the letter implies, it's a bunch of kids making a porno, and of course, they have to go to some weird, distant location where murder and killings are going to happen. And this is an exercise in style, but there is quite a lot of substance here. And despite it having, yes, a lot of sex and blood, this is a really funny picture. I mean, I was laughing a lot, and I do mean a lot during this film. And it doesn't detract, for the most part, from the main story. And I'm not going to give too much away. The twists are fine. You're not going to be spoiled too much if you just know the basic broad structure, which is that Pearl in her prequel returns here and it's basically going to be hunting down these kids. We kind of know what's going to happen. These kids are doing the Friday the 13th thing, having the sex and the drugs and having a good time, but then suddenly the killer approaches. I will say it is clever using Pearl as the killer, but beyond a certain point, you have to think to yourself, these are able bodied young people. They should be handling the situation better, but there we go. It's just a trope. This is obviously an homage to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I will say, though, I don't think it's a spot on homage because that film was way more political. It was way more deep, and it wasn't all that bloody. So they are doing a little bit too much style in a few places. But overall, this was a pretty amazing job, especially the music. Like the musical cues, yes, some of them you're going to recognize, you're going to know ahead of time. But I was surprised how often the music was, it just came at the right moment. Even the use of nudity, and there is a lot, it isn't done in the way you think, and it is done to set up certain things in the plot that are paid off fairly well. Are there a few flaws? Yes, I do think Mia Goth is a little stronger in Pearl. Like her doing two roles is interesting and impressive, but beyond a certain point, there was no need for it. So I just felt that they were being fancy in a few places. But given the budget, given restrictions, this is pretty astonishing. It is a really good cast. The acting uniformly is pretty strong. I would say the plot, yes, you have to make some really ridiculous leaps at the end, but that's a trope of horror movies. I don't think they went too far. I think you could believe the world that they're in. Certain character decisions, yes, I would dispute. So it's not a perfect film. I do think Pearl was stronger and more consistent and cohesive in sort of being a fantasy film, but this does a really good job of being an homage to 1970s cinema. It does a really good job of borrowing from Paul Thomas Anderson without going too far. So overall, very strong film. I do strongly recommend X, but I will say you are probably better off seeing the prequel first with Pearl because if you don't, some of the Easter eggs and some of the way that dialogue comes back, it's not going to have the same power resonance. I was lucky I saw Pearl and then I saw X, so I managed to get, I think, more of the impact of the story and the performances. But you do you. Either way, if you want to see it as a standalone, it will be still very impressive. But I do think seeing Pearl in conjunction will give it an extra powerful punch. And that's where I stand with X. Highly recommended.